Hey, Larkin Rose here, and for this video, weirdly enough, I want you to pay more attention to your own thoughts and feelings and opinions than you do to mine. I'm going to say some things, and I want you to keep a close eye on both your thoughts about it and your feelings about it. For example, this is not what I'm actually saying. For example, if I got on here and said, I think murder is perfectly fine. It's perfectly okay to just run around randomly killing innocent people. You would presumably have some feelings about that. You'd probably think, well, this guy's a dangerous psycho and unbalanced. And you'd be right if I was saying that. You may also have some thoughts about it, like, is he being serious? And you could probably intellectually describe why that's bonkers and wrong and all sorts of things, in spite of your feelings. Like, if you actually thought I meant it, you might get kind of mad or upset, and that would be totally justified if I was saying, yeah, mass murder is fine, whatever. So you might get feelings and thoughts and have them both. I want you to keep a close eye on your feelings and thoughts in response to some other things to see how you react and whether your feelings and thoughts actually match or not. So here's the main thing I actually want to say. And this time, I'm not kidding, I'm not joking, I mean it. I consider myself above the law. I feel absolutely no moral obligation whatsoever to obey any of the myriad requirements and demands that have been legislated into law by governments, federal, state, local, whatever. I have no respect for the law whatsoever. I don't care about it. Now, there are often times where I will obey because badge-wearing enforcers with guns will hurt me if I don't. But that's a different thing. I might also obey mafia thugs and carjackers. It's not out of a feeling of moral obligation. It's just because, well, if they're going to hurt me enough, maybe I'll go along with what they say. But I am absolutely above the law in every single way. The law is beneath me. I have no respect for it whatsoever. So let's pause there to see how you feel about that. Because most people are probably going to feel like, well, that's a little bit scary and this guy might be a little bit unstable and dangerous. Is he okay with robbing people and murdering people? And I slightly spoiled that by saying before I don't believe that murder is okay. So maybe should have used a different example. But in your feelings, you probably felt a little bit, if you're like most people anyway, you probably felt like, that's creepy and weird, and I'm not sure I want to be around somebody who believes that. Okay, and what do you think about it? What is your logical rationale of if that's something you agree with or not? Now, most of the world is obviously going to disagree with that. Most of the world respects the law. They believe in being law-abiding and all that and so on and so forth. And a lot of people could put together the thought of, well, if everybody did that, it would be chaos and we're killing and robbing each other all over the place, so we can't have that. Couldn't have civilization, couldn't have peaceful coexistence if people had no respect for the law. That would be a thought you can have about that. It's a total non sequitur thought, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, if you thought me saying that I have no respect for the law and I consider myself above the law means that you think I have no respect for other people's life or liberty or property, you'd be absolutely totally wrong. I am very much and completely against murder and assault and theft and fraud. Basically, every kind of aggression against somebody else, I think all of that's wrong. Now, the reason I think that's wrong has absolutely nothing to do with legislation. Murder didn't become bad when some politicians sat down and wrote a law about it. It was already bad. Murder is inherently wrong. You didn't need politicians writing something to make it be wrong. And when they wrote a law that says you're not allowed to murder people, It didn't become any more wrong, didn't become any less wrong, had no effect whatsoever. So I have zero respect for the law that says you're not allowed to murder people, but I 100% believe it's not okay to murder people. But it has absolutely nothing to do with governments legislating something. If tomorrow they legislated, oh, now you're allowed to murder people. No, it would still be just as wrong. If they legislated, well, now you're required to murder people, which they do. It's called the military draft. It's still just as wrong as it was before. So in the case of murder, I have zero respect for the law, but am 100% opposed to murder. Now, I do support the use of defensive force. If somebody's attacking you, you have the right to defend yourself. If somebody's attacking somebody else, you have the right to defend them by force if necessary. You have the right to escalate things to whatever level it takes to stop the aggressor from hurting an innocent person. None of that has anything to do with me having respect for law, which I don't. And when the law says, oh, that person's allowed to rob that person, we're going to call it taxes or we're going to call it something else. No, theft is still just as bad as it was before. I have zero respect for that law. When the law matches morality, like if the law says don't murder people, okay, well, I agree, but it isn't because of the law. So I still have no respect for the law. That's just somebody saying something. Them legislating it isn't any more important or valid than me just saying, yeah, murder's bad. It already was. Didn't need me to say so. Didn't need them to legislate it. It was already bad. So if the law matches morality, it's just redundant and irrelevant and I don't care. If the law conflicts with morality, if they wrote a law that said, yeah, you should go murder anybody with red hair, then the law would all the way be evil and should absolutely be disobeyed and resisted in every way possible by every decent human being. Same thing when it comes to theft. There can be a law against it. I'm entirely against theft. I absolutely believe in private ownership of things. You have lots of things that are your things. Other people don't have the right to take your things from you without your permission. It's pretty basic. I know I'm talking about things that most 5-year-olds already understand. But that has nothing to do with law. And if they write a law that says, well, you're not allowed to take somebody else's stuff because that's bad, well, it was already bad and it would be bad without that law. And when they write a law, which every government in history has, that says, oh, we're allowed to take your stuff. We, the government, we're allowed to take your stuff. We'll call it taxes, because calling it stealing makes it look as bad as it is. We'll call it taxes. Now you have to give us your stuff, whether you consented or not, whether you agreed or not, because now we legislated. I have no respect for that law either. So again, either the law matches morality and is irrelevant and who cares, or it goes against the morality, in which case it should absolutely be disobeyed. So, right now, do you remember back to your first instinctive response to when I said, I think I'm above the law and I have no respect for the law? Has your feeling changed since then, since I've elaborated on what I mean? Because now you know it's not that I have no respect for other people. It's not that I think theft and murder and assault are okay. They're not at all. It's just that I don't think politicians' scribbles have anything to do with whether that's right or wrong. Legislation isn't why you shouldn't murder people or steal their stuff. That's just inherently wrong, regardless of what any government says, for or against it. But now I want you to pause and check on your feels. Is there part of you that still feels uneasy about the idea of being above the law? By the way, now I'll throw this out too. You're above the law too. I absolutely believe that you, whoever you are watching this, I don't even know you, I believe you're above the law too. I believe if you're a sane human being, you absolutely should put your own moral code above blind obedience to whatever the politicians declare to be law. You should do what you think is right. Now, I might not even agree with that, and there can still be conflicts between people. I say that because the only alternative is literally insane. Because the only alternative to you being above the law and using your own conscience ultimately above everything else, like at the end of the day, you have to do what you think is right. The only alternative to that is for you to really and truly believe that you are morally obligated to do what you think is wrong. How schizophrenic and insane do you have to be to think that the good thing for you to do is to set aside your own conscience, your own moral judgment, and to do what you think is wrong because authority told you to? That's literally insane. It isn't just dangerous and a bad idea. It's literally insane for you to feel morally obligated to ignore your own moral judgment, because that's what that requires. If you don't think you're above the law, if you think the law is above you and you're obligated to obey it, then if some law happens to exist, whether now or in the future, that says you are required to do X, and you think, that's wrong. I don't want to do X. I think that's genuinely an immoral, destructive thing to do. Okay, well, now you have a choice. Either the law is above you and you're now obligated to do what you think is wrong. The law is above you and now you're obligated to commit evil. Does that sound sane to you? Or you're above the law and your conscience and your moral judgment outranks the legislation of every set of political parasites in the world. And you would be justified in saying, no, that law commands me to do something I think is wrong. At the end of the day, my conscience has to win. I can't be obligated to do something I think is bad, duh. Well, that means you're above the law. Again, pause for a minute and check how this makes you feel. And it might make it even weirder that I'm here saying, I absolutely think you are above the law, even if you don't. I think you should put your conscience above the dictates of legislatures and politicians. In fact, I think it's kind of insane not to. And that's true even if you and I would disagree on something. Now, hopefully most of us would agree on, like, don't murder people and don't steal their stuff. It's some basic stuff like that. But there may be some areas where we have disagreement. But it would still be really weird for me to say that, no, what you should do is whatever you think is wrong. But from your perspective, that would be bonkers for you to believe that. Just like from my perspective, it would be bonkers for me to really and truly think I am morally obligated to obey the law, even if it tells me to do something that I think is immoral. That's bonkers. It isn't just a bad idea, it's bonkers. For me to think I'm morally obligated to do what I think is morally wrong. That doesn't add up. However you slice it, that does not add up. That is insane. It's not just stupid, it's literally insane to think that. So, when subjected to the idea that you are above the law, and that you're not obligated to obey the Scribbles Code law, what is your feeling response to that? Do you have sort of a gut level instinctive discomfort with that? Most people do. Because they're like, because you've been trained to feel like this thing called law is important and that your goodness depends upon you playing by the rules and being law abiding and all that. So if some weird guy on the internet says, no, you're not bound at all to do anything the politicians tell you to, you are absolutely obligated to not murder people and rob them, but it's not because politicians said so. It's not because I said so either. But you have no obligation to respect the law at all. How does it make you feel to hear someone tell you that? Because it's one thing for me to tell you that I think I'm above the law, but it's kind of a different thing for me to tell you, most of you being complete strangers to me, I don't even know who I'm talking to, that I think you're above the law. That I think you should put your conscience above obedience to politicians. In fact, you should put your conscience above my conscience. Because why would you Why would you defer to what I think is right and wrong instead of following your heart, your conscience, your moral code, whatever you want to call it, your ideas of right and wrong? Why would you defer to anybody else? Me, government, anyone? Because if you defer that necessarily means that you are choosing to do what your conscience tells you is wrong. Open a history book and see the real world results of what happens when people throw their conscience out the window and become order obeyers. I just did as I was told. I was just following orders. I was just doing my job. That was the excuse for just heinous atrocities for centuries. That's the real world outcome. But if I plunk the idea in your lap that you are above the law too, that you shouldn't have any respect for the legislative garbage that they call law, how do you feel about that? Does that make you feel uncomfortable? I bet it does for most people. I know it did for me the first time I thought about that. Because because of what everyone around me believed, including my parents and friends and teachers and everybody else, I had been so ingrained with the idea that obedience is a virtue, that following the rules and abiding by the law equals being a good person. And you'll hear that constantly in the way people talk. Well, I'm a law-abiding taxpayer. That's how good I am. So you do what politicians tell you to, and you give them your money. Is that the real measure of whether you're a good human being? Because I hate to break it to you, politicians do some pretty nasty things with the tax dollars they steal from you. So being proud that you helped fund a bunch of the evil stuff that they do, that's a little weird. So I'm going to go one step further. I think the world would be way better off if you got to spend every penny of your money and never gave a penny in taxes to any ruling class ever. Now, never mind that they would do nasty things to you. You may pay up just to avoid the IRS thugs in your life. That's a different issue. But morally speaking, I don't think you have any obligation to give any money to government in the name of taxes. And once again, I don't even know you. I don't know what you would support, what you would spend your money on. What I do know is that it would be literally insane for you to think that it's better to not let yourself have the choice of what you support and what you buy or what you donate to or what you support or who you trade with, but instead let a bunch of politicians spend your money for you. How bonkers do you have to be to think that letting those people take your money and spend it for you is going to be better for the world than you just deciding what to do with your own property and your own money, whether it's donating it, helping the poor, or buying stuff, or investing, or whatever. Now, if something's a good idea that like government's going to build a library, okay, you're allowed to decide, I'm going to donate to help build the library. Okay, that's fine. You can voluntarily do that. The only time this conflict matters is if government says, you must, we are going to make you fund this thing that otherwise you wouldn't want to fund. Well, if you wouldn't want to fund it, it's because you don't see value in it, or you might think it's genuinely destructive or immoral. Why on earth would you feel obligated to hand over your money to fund things that you're against? Or at least that you think are a giant waste and pointless and inefficient and whatever. Like a welfare state. Well, I want to help the poor. Okay, go find a poor person and give them your money. Well, no, government says I have to help the poor by way of them robbing the hell out of me, throwing most of the money into a giant administrative monstrosity, wasting a bunch of it, and mostly giving it to corrupt people who are gaming the system. And why is that better than you actually helping somebody in need that you know about and know personally, and they're getting all of the help that you choose to give them? Why would you ever feel obligated to pay taxes for a welfare state to do something way, way worse than you could do on your own? Now, again, whether you're scared to not hand it over because they'll do unpleasant things to you, that's a different question. I'm talking about the feeling of moral obligation. I'm talking about, are you above the law or are you beneath the law? Because here's the law, and either your conscience outranks the law or the law outranks your conscience. How does it feel to think about that thing, that idea? For me, it was pretty dang uncomfortable, and it took me a long time to all the way get to the point where I can say, with no qualms and no feeling of awkwardness, of course I'm above the law. The law is just whatever arbitrary garbage the worst people in the world decide to legislate, which is always crooked, it's always corrupt, it's always garbage, and almost everybody knows that. You can say, well, we need government to do these good things that it never does. We need it to not be corrupt, even though it's always corrupt. Okay, but you're not giving money to some theoretical good government that you wish existed. Your choices are, do you give money to a bunch of political crooks and lying, manipulative, divide and conquer psychopaths? Or do you have the right to spend your own money? Again, you may pay the extortion racket protection fees just so they don't come break your kneecaps. Well, they'll cage you or steal your stuff instead of that. But when it comes to the issue of being above the law, how does it feel to you to think about, to hear that idea, especially from some random guy just telling you you're above the law and you should be above the law? And what do you think about it? Because for a lot of people, and this was me, it feels like, oh, that can't be right. But then when I fire up my thinking brain, I think, that can't be right, but why isn't it right? Why would I ever put the judgment and the commands of political crooks above my own conscience? Why would I be obligated to do that? That's really weird. So look at how you feel about it and look at if you can actually think of a reason to object to the idea that you're above the law and absolutely should be above the law. Because at the end of the day, there's two choices here. Whenever there's a conflict between what the law says and what your conscience tells you, and it's whether it's like, well, your kids don't have the right to have a lemonade stand without getting a permit, some trivial, weird, dumb little thing, or you're obligated to pay taxes for some war that you think is heinous and evil, to whether it's just some stupid little annoyance or whether it's government forcing you to support something you think is genuinely immoral, whatever that might be, there are two choices. If the law is above you, you're a robot and a slave. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a literal description. If you function as a person who decides what to do, not based on your own conscience, not on what you judge to be right and wrong, not on anything like that, but just on obeying the politicians over there, no matter what they say, no matter what they require of me, no matter what they tell me I have to do or I'm not allowed to do. If you're somebody who just does that, you are a robot and a slave. That's kind of what those words mean. You just do. You don't have free will anymore. You don't have a conscience. You're not paying any attention to what you think is right and wrong. Now you're just a puppet of those people doing whatever they say, funding whatever they say, going along with whatever they say. So that's one choice. If you're not above the law, if the law is above you, you're a robot and a slave. That's just the reality. Now, you may feel uncomfortable hearing that. Okay, and I understand, and I sympathize. I felt uncomfortable when I first thought about this stuff. See if you can think of an actual logical rebuttal to what I just said. If you put the dictates of a political authority above your own conscience, how are you not a robot and a slave? If you'll just obey them no matter what is right or wrong, no matter what's true or false, you'll just obey because you can't be above the law, how are you not a robot or a slave? And the only other choice is that you're above the law. And that you, as finite as you are, as fallible as you may be, as imperfect as we all are, At the end of the day, all you have is your own conscience and your own moral code, whatever that's based on, whatever beliefs you've developed over the years. At the end of the day, if you're not doing what you think is right, why are you even bothering to be a person? If you're not using your free will and your judgment and you're just being a robot or a slave to somebody else, whether they're good, bad, or anything else, giving up your humanity to them, if that's the other choice, why wouldn't you embrace being a human being and recognizing the only sane, moral, human choice is you are and have always been and always will be above the law. And this thing that's been pounded into your head called the law and authority, especially political authority, was always just emotional indoctrination BS designed to try to reduce you to being a slave and a robot for the worst people in the world. Feel free to respond in the comments below with feelings and with thoughts and see if you can make the distinction yourself. Because some of the feelings might be, well, we can't have that. We have to have some law. There has to be some government or there would be chaos and mayhem. Okay, there can be the instinctive fear, the instinctive aversion to something that feels that weird and like, what? You can't just have no respect. What do you mean? But then watch for the thought side of it. See if anybody in the comments below can explain to me why you personally, not why you're scared other people might do nasty things, like they do anyway, even when there is law. You personally, see if you personally can explain to me, for most of you, I'm just a complete stranger, see if you can explain to me why the sane, intelligent, rational, moral thing for you to do is for you to ignore your own conscience and your own judgment and your own view of right and wrong in favor of blindly obeying crooked politicians. See if you can explain why that is a sane position to hold. Because if you don't hold that position, there's only one other option, which is to recognize that you too are above the law.